The Wonderfully Boring Life of the Cave Dwellers. Chapter 1. The Cave. Once upon a very distant time, before roads, before electricity, before even the idea of writing or calendars, there was a hill. And in this hill was a cave. Not a special cave, not a magical cave. Just a regular, gray, uneven, chilly cave with a wide, round entrance and a floor that was hard and made of stone. The cave did not smell very good, but the people who lived inside didn't mind. They had lived in it for so long that they hardly noticed the scent of smoke, old animal fur, dried leaves, and the faint tang of wet rock. The walls were rough, not painted or polished, but if you looked closely, you could see the faint scratches of old hands drawing stick figures with bits of charcoal. Inside the cave lived 15 people. There were 5 men, 5 women, and 5 children. Every one of them had a name, but they did not use names very often. They would simply nod, point, or grunt in each other's direction when something needed doing. Life was slow. It was very, very slow. Nothing ever happened quickly. The sun would rise, and with it, they would slowly wake up. The wind would blow gently across the entrance, and sometimes, if it was raining, water would drip quietly into a puddle just inside the cave mouth. Drip, drip, drip. Chapter 2. The Morning Routine. Every morning, the same things would happen in the same order. First, the fire would be checked. This was important. If it had gone out completely, they would need to make a new one using stones and sticks, which took time and patience. But usually someone had been careful during the night to keep a few glowing embers hidden beneath ashes. Someone always sat near the fire during the night. Not because they wanted to, but because that's just how it was done. Once the fire was gently brought back to life with puffs of breath and dry twigs, they would sit around it in silence. They didn't talk much in the morning. They mostly stretched and stared at the fire. Sometimes someone would grunt or hum. Eventually they would begin the food discussion. It was always the same. One of the men, the tallest one with long hair tied in a knot, would point at the sky, then point at the forest. That meant it was time to go out. Another would nod. A third would slowly rise, stretch again, and collect a few spears. These were not sharp spears. They were worn from years of use, and the tips needed sharpening. They always needed sharpening. A few of the women would prepare the carrying baskets. These were made of twisted reeds and animal hide. They smelled like old leaves and sometimes mold. The baskets would be slung over shoulders. No one ever seemed excited to go. But they always went. Chapter 3. The Gathering. The cave people did not hunt large animals very often. It was dangerous, and they preferred food that didn't run. So most of their food was gathered from the forest. They walked in single file. Slowly, always slowly. Their bare feet made soft sounds in the leaf-covered ground. Crunch. Crunch, crunch. They looked at the ground as they walked, searching for anything that could be eaten. Berries, mushrooms, roots, or nuts. Sometimes they found a bush with red berries. The oldest woman would look at them closely before picking. She had a very wrinkled face and eyes that squinted in the sun. If she nodded, they picked. If she shook her head, they moved on. They used sticks to dig in the dirt. It wasn't exciting, it wasn't fast. But sometimes they found thick roots or bulbs, and they placed them gently in the baskets. Every now and then, they saw an animal, a rabbit, a bird, a deer, and one of the men would throw a spear. Most of the time, the spear missed. When it hit, there was a short burst of activity, but it ended quickly. If they caught something, they carried it back tied to a stick. If not, they returned with roots and leaves. Chapter 4. The Return to the Cave. The walk back to the cave was as slow as the walk out. The sun was usually higher, and sometimes it was hot, but they didn't complain. They simply walked and listened to the wind. When they reached the cave, the children would come to the entrance and look eagerly into the baskets. The food was always more or less the same. Berries, mushrooms, maybe a squirrel, maybe not. They would sit again around the fire. The food would be placed on a flat rock. They had no plates, No forks, no salt. They ate with their fingers. The taste was bland, earthy, mostly chewy, but they chewed slowly, calmly, as if eating were just something to pass the time. Which, in fact, it was. Chapter 5. The afternoon. After eating, the adults did tasks. Small tasks, quiet tasks. One would sit and rub a stone tool against another stone to sharpen it. Another would scrape the fur off an old hide with a dull blade. Someone else would sort through dried bones to find ones good for needles or hooks. It was repetitive work, over and over, day after day. The children played, but their games were not noisy. They threw small stones. They tried to balance sticks. They chased bugs. Sometimes they climbed trees. But they always came back before the sun started to go down. Chapter 6. The evening. When the shadows grew long and the forest became dark, they all came back to the fire. The fire was everything. It gave light. It gave warmth. It kept animals away. They all sat around it in a loose circle. Some leaned on each other, some stared into the flames. Occasionally someone told a story. The stories were short and slow. They went like this. There was a big animal, a very big animal. We saw it. We tried to hunt it. It ran away. That is the story. Everyone would nod. It was not a thrilling story, but it was the story for the evening. Then someone might hum a tune. A soft, low tune with no words. It would rise and fall like the wind. Sometimes someone would tap a stick on a rock. Tap, tap, tap. But only for a little while. Chapter 7. Sleep. When the stars were in the sky, the people would lie down. They did not have beds, just fur and dry grass. They curled up next to each other for warmth. The fire crackled softly. No one talked anymore. There were no more stories. Just breathing, just the occasional snore. Just the slow, slow rhythm of the cave. Outside, the wind blew through the trees. Inside, the fire burned low. The cave walls held the heat, and the cave people dreamed. They dreamed of walking in forests, of picking berries, of chewing mushrooms, of sitting by the fire. And the next day, it would all begin again. Exactly the same, just as slow, just as peaceful, just as uneventful. Chapter 8. A very ordinary day. The next day began the same way as all the days before it. The fire was low, the cave was quiet. Outside, the birds sang slowly and the leaves barely moved. One of the men stood up. He didn't say anything. He just stretched his arms above his head and yawned loudly. Then he poked the fire with a stick. The embers glowed orange, and with more sticks and a bit of dry grass, the fire came back to life. Others began to rise. No one rushed. There was no reason to rush. The sun was rising, but it would be in the sky for a long time. There was no schedule, no meetings, no deadlines, only the usual rhythm of the day. They all sat in the same places as the day before. No one questioned it. The tall man sat on the flat rock near the entrance. The old woman sat near the back where the air was warmer. The children stayed close to the fire, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Chapter 9. Tools and Tasks. This day was not for gathering. It was a tool day. Every few days they stayed near the cave to fix and sharpen what they used. The spears, the baskets, the scraping stones. Everything wore down with use. So, they worked. Quietly, calmly, without speaking much. The tall man took a piece of flint and began chipping it into a sharper point. Chip. Chip. Pause. Chip. Chip. His face showed no emotion. It was not exciting work. But it was necessary. One of the women took an old basket and began to retie the bindings with strips of dried grass. It took a long time. Every knot had to be tight. She worked slowly, occasionally holding it up to the light to see her progress. The children were told to collect dry sticks. They walked just outside the cave and looked for twigs. Not big sticks, not wet sticks, only dry ones. They didn't rush. They took their time. Every few minutes, one would return with a small handful and drop it in a pile. The old woman was rubbing a stone against a bone. She didn't seem to be doing much, but she knew what she was doing. After many hours, that bone would become a needle. Chapter 10. The Windy Afternoon. That afternoon, the wind was stronger than usual. It made the trees sway slowly, back and forth, back and forth. Leaves fell from the branches, twisting gently through the air before landing on the forest floor. The wind brought a chill into the cave. Some of the people wrapped animal skins around their shoulders. Others sat closer to the fire. The wind wasn't dangerous, it was just wind. But it was something different, so they noticed. They talked about it in short sentences. Wind strong. Yes, very strong. It comes from the mountains. Maybe. Then they returned to their work. Chapter 11. A New Discovery. Later that week, something unexpected happened. But not very unexpected. Just a little bit. One of the younger men went further into the forest than usual and found a tree with round, yellow fruit hanging low. He had not seen this kind of fruit before. It smelled sweet, and it was soft to the touch. He picked one and tasted it. It was not bad, not amazing, but not bad. He picked a few more and carried them back to the cave. When he returned, the others came to look. They touched the fruit, smelled it, turned it in their hands. New food? Yes. Taste? Yes. One by one, they tasted it. Everyone chewed slowly. No one made a face. No one said anything, but most of them nodded. It was acceptable. They added the new fruit to their food pile. It became part of their meals. The children played with the seeds. The adults talked for an extra few minutes about where the tree had been found. But after that, life returned to normal. Chapter 12. The Long Night. That night, the fire burned longer than usual. Someone had added more wood, and the flames danced brighter. The shadows on the cave walls moved gently like slow ghosts. A few people stayed up later. They told old stories. One of them talked about a time when lightning hit a tree and set it on fire. Another remembered a winter with too much snow. But the stories were not dramatic. They were told in low voices with long pauses between words. Eventually, everyone yawned. One by one, they lay down on their furs. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had stopped. The forest was silent. Inside the cave, the people slept. Chapter 13. Winter is coming. Eventually. The weather began to change. Slowly, of course. Everything changed slowly. The air was cooler in the morning. The sky was more gray than blue. Birds flew in groups above the trees, heading south. The people noticed, but they didn't worry. They began to gather more food. They dried mushrooms and roots near the fire. They made piles of wood. They patched holes in the animal skin blankets. Every day they did a little bit. Not too much, never in a hurry. One of the women made a new pair of shoes from deer hide. She worked on them every evening for a week. They were simple, no decorations, just warm and practical. Chapter 14. The First Snow. One morning they woke to find the forest covered in a thin layer of snow. It was quiet. Very quiet. The kind of quiet that makes everything feel softer. The children went outside and touched the snow. One licked it, another made a ball and dropped it. The adults stood at the cave entrance and watched. Snow meant cold. Cold meant staying closer to the fire. Gathering trips would become shorter, but this happened every year. It was not a surprise. They adjusted. They always did. Chapter 15. The Winter Life. During winter, days were slower than ever. They didn't leave the cave unless necessary. They ate dried food, drank melted snow, and told stories. They fixed broken things. They sat close together. They hummed more songs. There were no arguments, no complaints. Just the sound of fire, the drip of melting snow, and the steady rhythm of breath. Night came early. They slept longer. And while they slept, the cave held them gently, wrapped in the quiet of stone, fur, and time. Chapter 16. The Days in Snow. Winter did not leave quickly. It stayed as it always did for a long time. The days were gray. The nights were long. The snow outside the cave grew deeper, and the path to the forest became harder to walk. But the cave people did not complain. They accepted the snow just like they accepted the rain, the wind, and the sun. The cold air came into the cave, and they moved their sleeping places closer to the fire. They wore more layers of animal skins. They shared their heat. They walked slowly, even inside the cave. Their breath made small clouds when they spoke. But most of the time, they didn't speak. In the mornings, someone would always check the food pile. Dried roots, mushrooms, a few strips of smoked meat. Nothing exciting, but enough. They ate slowly, carefully. Every bite was important. Nothing was wasted, not even the smallest piece. Even bones were chewed for the marrow. Chapter 17. The Smoke Hole. One of the things they did during winter was to fix the smoke hole. The smoke hole was a small opening near the top of the cave, where smoke could escape. Sometimes it got blocked by snow or sticks. When that happened, the cave became smoky and made people's eyes sting. So once a week, 2 of the younger men would climb carefully on top of the cave and clear the hole. It was not a dangerous job, but it was cold and slow. They would use sticks to push away snow. Sometimes birds had nested there and they would have to move bits of twigs. Then they would return slowly and sit by the fire to warm up. Everyone would watch the smoke rise again and nod quietly. Chapter 18. The Old Man's Memory. One evening, the oldest man in the group spoke more than usual. His hair was white and his face had so many wrinkles that his eyes looked like small dots. He pointed at the fire and began to speak in a slow, scratchy voice. Long ago, he said, there was another cave. It was bigger, much bigger, with more people, more fire, more meat. The children listened with wide eyes. But then, he continued, the river changed. The animals moved. People left. Now, we are here. He paused. No one asked questions. They just nodded. He didn't finish the story. He closed his eyes and leaned against the wall. Everyone stared at the fire in silence. The flames crackled gently and nothing more was said. Chapter 19. A Visit from the Deer. One morning near the end of winter, something unusual happened. A deer walked to the edge of the forest near the cave. It was thin, slow, and tired. It stood there for a long time, not running away. One of the men picked up a spear and walked toward it. Slowly. Quietly. But when he got close, the deer simply turned and walked away. Not fast, just calmly. He did not throw the spear. He stood still for a while, then came back. The others didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Chapter 20. The Thaw. As the weeks passed, the snow began to melt. The days grew longer. Drops of water fell from the edges of the cave like tiny songs. Drip, drip, drip. Green things returned to the forest. Small leaves, tiny flowers, bugs. The people noticed. They stretched more in the mornings. They stepped outside for longer. A new season had arrived, slowly, gently. Chapter 21. Life begins again. They began gathering again. The same paths, the same berries, the same mushrooms. Their rhythm was unchanged. Wake, walk, gather, eat, sit, sleep. But now the forest was full of color again. Birds returned. Squirrels ran. The people smiled a little more, though only slightly. No one danced, no one shouted, but the silence was warmer now. Chapter 22. Generations. The children were now older. They carried their own baskets. They helped with sharpening. One of them even made a spear. It was crooked, but it worked. The old woman passed on her knowledge about roots. Which ones to pick, which ones to leave. The oldest man didn't speak much anymore. He sat in the sun, leaned against the wall, and listened to the fire. Life continued, just as it always had. Chapter 23. No ending. There was no big event, no war, no celebration, no great invention. Only the fire, the forest, the footsteps, the stories, and the cave, holding them all gently through time. The end, or rather the continuation, for cave people never really had ending, but only seasons. Only